what exactly is a species anyway? A common definition is a group of organisms that can reproduce together and have fertile offspring. Although that does not really account for microbes, a species could instead be defined as the unit of common descent you can divide down to. Kind of like elements, but alive. Or maybe it's just something to do with patterns of gene flow. Annoyingly, it turns out that there are at least a couple dozen conflicting definitions officially out there. So maybe forget about species for a minute. There must be some categories of animals that we can agree on, right? Like rodents, or beetles, or snakes. Like we can all agree on what a snake is, right? Well, today's beast probably isn't one of the first snakes to come to mind. And what's more, it really challenges our ideas about species too, because every single one of these snakes is female and a clone, and maybe also a hybrid. The Bizarre Beast Pin Club is open for subscriptions for the whole month. Sign up by June 20th and your first pin will be one of these weird little snakes. The Brahminy blind snake, Indotyphlops braminus, is a tiny, non-venomous snake that both looks and acts like a worm. It's only 11.2 to 16.5 centimeters long. It spends most of its time burrowing through the soil, and its tiny mouth is best suited to eating the eggs, larvae, and pupa of ants and termites. The scales over its eyes make it practically blind, hence the common name. And after all, what's it really gonna see down there under that dirt? Though, that dirt can vary dramatically. This snake can live anywhere from forests of any kind, to grasslands, to semi-deserts, to swamps. And like a worm, we only ever really see it above ground after it rains or if we dig it up. It has a pointy tip on the end of its tail that it can use for some mild pokey defense, but it'll also make a literal stink about being caught via some musk glands in that tail. And that just about concludes the normal portion of this snake's list of traits, because even just talking about where it lives opens up a whole can of snakes that look like worms.
Before we dig more into the many ways that these snakes challenge our old assumptions about how species work, we want to take a moment to challenge some outdated assumptions about plant-based meat with today's sponsor, Beyond Meat. Plant-based meat has been a thing for a while now, but there's still a lot of noise surrounding it, including misleading social content and fear-based narratives fueled in part by the meat industry. Like, for example, plant-based meat is full of ultra-processed chemicals, when in fact, plant-based meat is full of plants. And processed isn't a universal category that automatically makes something unhealthy. That depends more on the actual ingredients. Beyond Meat products are Clean Label Project certified. Another myth is that plant-based meat is high in sodium. Sure, raw, unseasoned beef technically has less salt, but that's not really a fair comparison since most people also season meat before eating it. And the new Beyond Burger and Beyond Beef have just 14% of your daily value of sodium. Thanks to Beyond Meat for sponsoring this episode. You can order their products on Instacart. Check out the link in the description to learn more.
The Brahminy blind snake is only known for sure to be native to India and Sri Lanka, but its exact origins have been muddled because its range has expanded a bit. Living in tropical soil seems to at least partly serve the snake as a means of temperature regulation, but it's also become a means of getting accidentally spread all over the world in potted plants. Which is how it earned another of its common names, the flower pot snake. This snake now spans the tropical and subtropical biomes of every continent except for Antarctica. It doesn't seem to be necessarily invasive in some parts of its introduced range, though the potential has definitely been noted in others as something to keep an eye on. But our love of houseplants is not the only reason these tiny snakes have spread around the world, and it's definitely not the weirdest. No, the real reason that they are able to gain such a successful global foothold, so to speak, comes down to the way they reproduce. Because the Brahminy blind snake seems to exclusively reproduce asexually. We have only ever found females, and they can lay unfertilized eggs that grow up into adult clones. While we usually think of animal reproduction as a pair of individuals mating to make offspring that have their combined DNA, there are actually a lot of forms of asexual reproduction in animals too. In today's case, we're talking about parthenogenesis, which means a female having offspring without the need for a male. And this can happen in a couple of ways. In species like ants, bees, and wasps, females females lay eggs fertilized the old-fashioned way to produce female offspring, and they lay unfertilized eggs to produce males. In other species, parthenogenesis just entails a female giving birth without mating, period. And this is usually only a part-time strategy, or even just a Hail Mary when mates are too hard to come by. And we've covered this before in the bonnethead shark, and even with another snake species, Australia's coastal taipan. But the flowerpot snake is completely parthenogenetic. Not just sometimes, and there simply are no males. Male-free parthenogenesis like this occurs in about 0.1% of known animal species and in very few known vertebrate species. In fact, for vertebrates, full-blown all-the-time female-only parthenogenesis seems to only happen in some populations of snakes and lizards specifically. As for entire species of snakes that use this as their only reproductive method, well, that just leaves the Brahminy blind snake and nobody else. A female will lay 1 to 8 eggs at a time, and she could just, do that all on her own. To make matters weirder, this snake is also triploid, meaning it has 3 copies of every one of its chromosomes. Most of the time, animals are diploid with 2 copies of every chromosome, 1 from each parent in every cell. Polyploidy, having more than 2 copies of each chromosome, only happens in less than 1% of animal species. Now, this is common in plants, but it is pretty weird in animals. But both polyploidy and parthenogenesis are associated with a third strange thing: hybridization. Which brings us back to this whole species question. Of the numerous definitions out there, the biological species concept is the one that says a species is when 2 individuals can mate and produce fertile offspring. Since we're talking about virgin snake births, a reproduction-based definition feels kinda relevant here. When 2 different species mate and produce infertile offspring, the result is considered a hybrid that does not get species status under this model. For example, a mule is a hybrid, a sterile offspring of 2 different species, a horse and a donkey. But just like how the definition of a species isn't 100% locked down, this rule about what a hybrid is or can do also has some flexibility. Hybrid sterility is a pretty big barrier keeping hybrids from naturally proliferating. But it's really more of a problem for male individuals than females due to the weird interaction of opposite-sex chromosomes from parents of different species. So if a female hybrid could reproduce asexually, that is, without the need to even bother mating, then she could be good to go. Parthenogenesis, therefore, may actually act as a happenstance workaround for hybrid sterility, and that is where today's beast fits in. Because not only is the flowerpot snake a strange triploid globe-trotting clone, but it also seems to be a hybrid as well. Several studies of I. braminus from distant parts of the world determined that this blind snake's genome makes the most sense as the result of 1 or more hybridizations between diploid parents. A 2022 study then compared Indotyphlops specimens from different parts of India to explore the specifics of hybridization before the snake's world tour began. They concluded that the parthenogenetic hybrid found globally is the offspring of I. pamices and the true I. braminus, which both reproduce sexually, and that the widely distributed hybrid should have a whole new name. But the discovery of a genetic match for the true I. braminus in Italy a couple of years later suggests that either they are actually the same species, or that more than one kind of Indotyphlops is making the international rounds. Or that hybrid genetics is just really weird, and comparing only a handful of genes may not give enough of the picture to draw very big conclusions. Plus, neither study directly addressed the reproductive situation for the true I. braminus, and there's still every possibility that these 2 or maybe 3 Indotyphlops species are continually hybridizing back home to this day. Luckily, this genetic confusion does actually address another question. Wouldn't a completely asexual reproductive strategy sacrifice the chance for some really important genetic diversity? A population of clones is going to be much more vulnerable to things like new diseases than a population with a bunch of highly varied genomes. I mean, that was a major reason that sexual reproduction evolved in the first place. But being triploid and a hybrid may be how parthenogenetic species like the Brahminy blind snake avoid the genetic bottleneck you might expect. A 2025 comprehensive analysis of the snake's entire genome found that, yeah, it's definitely a triploid hybrid, but there also aren't an equal number of copies of every chromosome. Some other funky genetic stuff must be going on here. During sexual reproduction in a diploid organism, chromosomes from each parent couple up, trade bits with their matches in a process called recombination, and then split apart into new reproductive cells. Meiosis, cell division that produces germ cells, in a triploid organism like the flowerpot snake, gets a bit more complex, and usually starts with all of the chromosomes doubling first in order to produce an even number. From there come lots of possibilities, ranging from recombination between matched chromosomes to exchanges of whole chromosome copies between the 3 different ancestral sets. The result is more variation than you might expect for an individual that's technically cloning herself, carefully balanced with enough stability to keep it all running. Essentially, the extra chromosomes kicking around in polyploids provide just enough genetic diversity to keep the gene pool from getting too weak without totally breaking everything. Parthenogenesis may not be a first-choice adaptation for the long term, but because of the genetic quirks here, it technically works. And evolution is ultimately just the survival of the good enough. Not to mention that evolution is never on purpose. Vertebrates seem to mainly stumble into parthenogenesis when something big and unusual happens, like interspecies hybridization. And polyploidy also largely occurs in hybrids, so those factors together created the perfect storm for this little snake's accidental but overwhelming global success. We humans try our best to understand life on Earth, but life is bound and determined to defy every rule and definition we come up with for it. Even definitions as fundamental as what a species is and how one can work. The Brahminy blind snake seems like a species, but turns out to be a hybrid of itself and another species, and it can still reproduce, but only by self-cloning. Really, it's an encapsulation of all the bizarre contradictions that make our attempts at labels so futile. And in a roundabout but practical way, this beast's very weirdest qualities manage to cancel each other out, allowing it to keep doing its tiny, snaky business down in the dirt, where it can quietly take over the world. Sign up for the Pin Club at BizarreBeastsShow.com and help us keep this channel going. If you want a blind snake to be your first pin, sign up by June 20th.
We have big news. Endlings is back. Endlings is our series about the last member of a species, the endling. But it's also really about people and our relationship to extinction. We are so excited to announce that after the success of our first 7 episodes, we are making a whole new season. The first new episodes about the Japanese wolves and the Galapagos tortoises are ready for you to watch right now here on the Bizarre Beast channel.
And now for some bonus facts. Parthenogenesis was quite a big deal for such a little snake, but what's up with the other ways vertebrates can reproduce asexually? Gynogenesis is when a female lays eggs that only contain her own genes, but she requires a male's sperm to actually trigger development of the embryo. Why go through the trouble of actually mating only to just clone yourself? Because, you guessed it, you're a hybrid. Take the all-female fish species, the Amazon molly. In order to reproduce, individuals need to mate with a male, usually of any number of other species in their same genus. The male's sperm actually do meet the eggs, but their DNA doesn't fully incorporate, and the hybrid is able to pass on its genes unadulterated. A related phenomenon is kleptogenesis, which also involves hybrid females using male sperm to make their eggs go, but which can also result in the offspring having a higher ploidy number if the male DNA is incorporated. This can be seen in the salamander genus Ambystoma, which may either exclude the male DNA from her offspring to create clones, fully incorporate the sperm into some eggs to up the ploidy, or replace her own DNA in other eggs. And finally, there is hybridogenesis, a complicated method that incorporates some elements from both of the previous ones. The most well-known example is the water frog complex, where 3 different species in the genus Pelophylax all mate in different combinations. Reproduction in this system is partly sexual and partly clonal, allowing the hybrid to persist by more than one mating means. It just goes to show that reproduction is always an option when molecular genetics is basically magic.